Welcome to my channel. My name is Danny, and today we're going to have the first episode of Fantasy Genre Blends. So if you guys have watched any of my previous videos, you may have heard me talk about the fact that I really enjoy it when other genres mix themselves with fantasy. And so I wanted to create a series where I could explore that a little bit further. I want to look into the different genres that I have enjoyed in the past, or maybe even some new ones, and see if I can find some books that do incorporate some fantastical elements, and see which of the genres I prefer to kind of narrow down my interests and hopefully yield some better TBRs in the future. So how this series is going to work at this point is I am going to talk about 3 books that I've read at this point in time, my ratings for them, the descriptions, and then what fantasy blends they are. And then I will also announce 3 books that I have on my TBR for the following couple of months. And then in the following couple of months, I'll talk about those books, and I'm going to be compiling essentially data on each of the fantasy genre blends that I find to figure out which one is my preference. And I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to come back to that data, if I'm going to wait 10 episodes or if I'm going to wait a year. I'm not sure at this point, so we'll just kind of see where it leads us. When trying to create content, I definitely want the content to be something that is going to help my reading journey and that I'm going to enjoy. And so when I kept hearing myself talk about the fact that I really enjoy it when fantasy blends with other genres, I thought, well, why not make a video series out of it? So that's where the idea came from. So come along with me on this journey. So the first book that we're going to talk about is Catherine House by Elisabeth Thomas. I classified this as fantasy mystery, which is a little bit of a stretch, but since I'm making the rules, I figured I'd throw it on the list because I really enjoyed this book. So I rated this book 4.5 stars. And if you've never heard of Catherine House, it's very polarizing. A lot of people either hate it or love it, and I would describe it as meandering. So it's definitely a book that doesn't get straight to the point. You're not in action the entire time, and you're just kind of living with the people who are on the campus. So Catherine House is a prestigious institution that gives their students free tuition and free room and board as long as they essentially give themselves to Catherine House for the 3 years that their education exists, and that includes the summer. So they are isolated completely in the campus. They're not allowed to talk to family, friends. They're not allowed to go off of the campus. They live there for 3 years and are not allowed to contact the outside world. And so that in and of itself is a little creepy, but students who go there typically go on to lead these very prestigious lives. So we have our main character, I believe her name is Inez, and she's running away from her life, essentially. And so she's perfectly fine giving away 3 years of her life to go and live in isolation on this campus for the chance at a better life afterwards. And so she starts out her journey living with her roommate, Baby. And Baby she really, really wants Catherine House to be like her new start. She wants to study really hard. She wants to go places. She wants to be involved in one of the highest, I'll say, degrees that they offer there, which is very hard to get into. And so she ends up getting into a bit of trouble. I don't want to go into details because I don't want to spoil it too much. But this event that happens leads Inez to think maybe there's something sinister going on at Catherine House. And so the book is kind of her journey living at Catherine House and experiencing these different things that Catherine House has their students do. So within some of the things that she experiences at Catherine House, there's a tiny kind of, maybe it's more science fiction than fantasy, but it's something that's happening that seems otherworldly. And she's not quite sure why it's happening, what the point of it is. And so that is kind of the mystery in the background that she's trying to solve. Does this have something to do with what happened? Is it something that she wants to be involved in? So I know that that's super vague, but I don't want to give away anything. I really thought that this book was something you just kind of have to fall into. I know a lot of people don't like Inez's character because she becomes more and more apathetic throughout the book, and so a lot of people just don't like her because she seems like she doesn't really care. But I think that's kind of the point of the story. I really appreciated the undercurrent in this book about how people who want connections can be taken advantage of, and how that need to belong somewhere can actually be, it can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing for people. And the mystery was just fascinating to see. This book does have an ambiguous ending, and so if you're expecting like to have all the answers by the end of the book, you're not going to get it with Catherine House. But if you are someone who would like to read about a super atmospheric place and kind of live in the moment with a couple of characters throughout the book, then maybe try this out. The next book I'm going to talk to you guys about is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel, which I rated 4.5 stars, and I'm going to place in the fantasy / historical fiction / mythology blend. So this book is about our main character, Kaikeyi, who is a princess in a country where women are not, women essentially have their place in society, and it's pretty rigid as far as what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And her mother ends up leaving early in the story, and so she kind of has to take on the role of matriarch. And she has 7 brothers, and within her her family, she finds ways of kind of pushing the limits of her boundaries. So the story is about her seeking her own power and kind of finding a path of her own, because her entire life has been dictated by the men in her life. And so she wants to break the mold. She wants to be in charge of her own destiny. And so this story kind of outlines how she does that. This book is really good about focusing on the connections with the characters, the relationships, which also ties into the magic system that they talk about. I'm not going to go into that in detail, but you see throughout this story Kaikeyi really digging into the relationships that she has in the world, and how essentially having a relationship with someone can bring you its own sense of power. So this story does a really good job of blending hero and villain in the story, and kind of how lines get blurred in the real world with different people's perspectives, and how different people view certain actions. I thought it was really fascinating to kind of explore that with her, and kind of be in Kaikeyi's mind and why she's making all of these decisions, but then also be able to look at how people outside of her see her actions and react to them. So this was one that definitely opened up new realms for me. I have read historical fiction or mythology retellings before, but it's never been a focus of mine, and so it's definitely something that I'm going to look into moving forward. Book number 3 that I've read, and this book I definitely kind of fell into. This is called The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, and I rated this 5 stars. So I did not realize that this was a horror novel whenever I picked it up. I had heard a lot of people talking about T. Kingfisher on YouTube, specifically Nettle and Bone, but I haven't been able to get a hold of a copy of Nettle and Bone from my library yet, and so I just wanted to check out some of their other works before I pick up Nettle and Bone. So I started reading it. I had this book on audio, and the first, 10% or so, it's about a woman who is down on her luck. She is divorced. She gets divorced from her husband and kind of has nowhere to go. And so she's getting ready to move back in with her mother, and her uncle, who she was raised around, offers for her to come and work at his museum, which is a place that she spent a lot of her childhood years. And this is a museum of curiosities. And so it kind of has odd baubles and interesting trinkety things, and a lot of a lot of taxidermy. And so it's just kind of an odd little museum that you can walk through. And so she goes back. She's thankful for the opportunity to not have to move back in with her parents and to actually be able to help her uncle out with this museum. And he ends up getting hurt, and she has to take over the museum for a small amount of time. And so it's just her, and she realizes that one of the tourists, she thinks, has poked a hole in one of the walls in the museum. And so she goes next door to the barista, Simon, who I guess has helped her uncle out in different odds and ends helping the museum, and asks him to help her spackle the wall. But in looking at kind of exploring the hole that was made in the wall, they find out that there's another room behind it, and so they decide to explore. Well, in this exploration, they end up in a different world. And I'm not going to go probably more into detail than that, but it's kind of their experience with this other world. And like I said, I didn't realize this was horror, because up until that point, everything's kind of like hunky-dory. But then some weird crap starts happening. And it was a wild ride, and I just couldn't put it down. It was so fun. It was very creepy and unsettling, but it was also funny. Simon's character is a hoot. He is hilarious the entire time. He's making like horror references, or horror movie references, and talking about how they're gonna die. And I think his character and the fact that there was some hilarity put into the horror storyline is what kept me engaged, because I think if it had just been all creepy, all scary, I don't know that I would have been, I think I probably would have still continued because I wanted to know what happened, but I don't think I would have been as pleased with the experience. Whereas his character kind of kept me grounded, and it was fun to be able to laugh at these crazy things that were happening in this really scary experience, where that happens in the real world, right? Like whenever you are scared, some people nervous laugh. And so I just thought that was a really cool element of the book. So 5 stars for me. This was a big surprise to me. I never thought I would read a horror book and enjoy it. It's not something I've ever wanted to experience before. And so I'll be looking into it more just to see if I can find more gems like this one. So on to the second half of the video, where I talk about some books that I plan on picking up to continue this series within the next couple of months. So the first book I plan on picking up is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro, or Miro. So I don't know much about this book, and I don't want to know much about this book before I go into it. I've read like the first sentence of the synopsis, which is essentially this book is going to be historical fantasy, and so it will be in that category. And it's about Victorian London with 2 children being hunted by a shadowy figure. Book number 2 is The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss. And I don't know much about this book, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it. And so I know that this book introduces some fictional characters, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and I think it involves their daughters, or the daughters of those characters. And so I'm interested to kind of see where this story goes. I know a lot of people, this is a beloved series, and so I'm excited to get into it. This one I'm going to classify as fantasy mystery. So the last book on my TBR for this series is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. So I don't know much about this book. This is a fantasy horror, and I have heard a lot of people talk about it, and I see it a lot, so that's kind of what brought me interest. The little piece of the synopsis that I did read talks about a missing god, a library that knows the answers to the universe, and a woman who doesn't realize her heart is slipping away. And so, I don't know, sounds interesting. We'll see. We'll give it a go and see how I like it. So I hope the series is something that interests you guys. If you guys have any recommendations for me on any blends with fantasy that you would like to see me read, please leave them in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next time.